The house was enormous, sitting at the end of a long, winding road, surrounded by tall gates and walls that kept the world at bay. It was the kind of mansion that took your breath away, a sprawling estate with beautiful gardens, marble floors, and chandeliers that glittered like stars. Inside, everything was pristine, perfectly arranged, like a picture from a magazine. But there was something hidden beneath the perfect surface, a secret of chaos, frustration, and three little kids who turned everything upside down. The triplets, Alex, Ben, and Charlie, were no ordinary children. At first glance, they seemed adorable, three identical boys with big blue eyes and messy brown hair, always dressed in the best clothes. But behind their innocent faces was a storm of energy, mischief, and rebellion. They were trouble, pure and simple, and they had managed to drive every nanny away. No one could handle them. No one could break through the wall of defiance that they'd built up over the years. Every nanny that had walked through the door had quickly discovered the truth: the triplets were wild. They weren't like other kids who needed rules or attention, they needed control. And the only thing they liked controlling was their environment. They would tear up rooms, throw tantrums, and laugh when things broke. The house, which should have been a sanctuary, was more like a battlefield. The nannies would arrive full of hope and confidence, but by the end of the day, they would leave, exhausted and beaten, swearing never to return. For the triplets' parents, it was an ongoing struggle. They were wealthy, powerful people who had everything except peace at home. They loved their children, but they didn't know how to manage them. The pressure of running a successful business, managing high-profile clients, and keeping up appearances left them little time for parenting. The children seemed to be a constant reminder of their failure to find a solution. They had hired the best nannies, sent the kids to exclusive schools, and tried everything they could think of, but nothing worked. The children weren't just difficult, they were impossible. Every day, it seemed like a new challenge. Alex would make a mess in the kitchen by dumping sugar all over the floor. Ben would sneak into his father's study and mess with important papers, laughing as his father shouted. Charlie would sneak up behind their mother and make faces in her reflection until she lost her patience. No matter how many rules they tried, no matter how many rewards or punishments they put in place, the boys refused to listen. The parents would sit in their grand living room, surrounded by fine furniture and expensive decor, but their smiles were hollow. Their world was beautiful on the outside, but inside, they felt like failures. They couldn't understand why their children didn't listen, why they didn't behave like other kids. They couldn't figure out why nothing worked. The perfect life they had built felt like a lie. Their frustrations grew with each passing day, and soon, they began to doubt if anyone could truly help. The triplets were too much for anyone to handle. They had tried everything, yelling, bribing, even offering them trips to the best amusement parks. But the triplets didn't care about any of it. The more the parents tried, the more the kids pushed back. The turning point came when they fired yet another nanny. She was the latest in a long line of failed attempts. The poor woman had barely lasted a few hours before giving up. "I'm done," she had said, her voice shaking. "I can't take it anymore. These kids aren't normal." She left in tears, and the parents were left in silence. "What are we going to do?" the mother asked, her voice low and filled with worry. "We can't keep going on like this. We're losing control." Her husband sat in his leather chair, staring out the window, deep in thought. He was tired, his face showing signs of stress and sleepless nights. "We'll just have to keep trying," he said, though there was no real hope in his voice. "Something will work." But deep down, both of them knew that the only thing that would truly change was if they found someone who could connect with their children. Someone who could see past their mischief, someone who could break through their walls. They knew they needed help, but where would they find it? And then, by a twist of fate, Sarah entered their lives. Sarah had never imagined she would end up working for the kind of family that lived in a mansion like the one on the hill. She had always dreamed of a quiet life, far from the chaos of the world, where her son, Jacob, could grow up in peace. But here she was, sitting in the waiting room of an estate that felt like a whole different world. Sarah was a single mother. Her life was simple, often challenging, but she loved her son with everything she had. She worked two jobs, one as a cashier in a small grocery store and the other as a part-time cleaner for a local office. It was tough, but it was enough to get by. Jacob, her 8-year-old son, was her reason for everything. She worked long hours, but the time they spent together was precious. Every night, they would curl up on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and watch movies. That was their life, and it was enough for Sarah. Then came the day when she overheard something that would change everything. It happened in the small coffee shop where she usually grabbed her morning cup of coffee before starting her day. Two women, one of them a regular at the shop, were sitting at a table, talking in hushed voices. Sarah wasn't eavesdropping on purpose, but their conversation was hard to ignore. They were talking about a job opening, an opportunity to work as a nanny for a wealthy family. A nanny for triplets, one of the women said, her voice filled with disbelief. I can't believe they're still looking for someone. They've gone through more nannies than I can count. Those kids are a handful. Sarah's ears perked up. Triplets. That sounded like a challenge, but a challenge could be the answer to everything. She needed a better job, something that would give her more stability, something where she could earn enough to finally take a break. Maybe this was the chance she had been waiting for. When she got home that day, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how perfect this could be. She knew she didn't have any experience with handling triplets, but she had raised Jacob on her own. She had dealt with tantrums, sleepless nights, and everything in between. What could be harder than that? The next morning, she called the number the woman at the coffee shop had mentioned. To her surprise, someone answered right away. The woman on the other end of the phone spoke with a tone that made Sarah feel small, but Sarah pushed forward. I heard about the nanny job, Sarah said. I'd like to apply. I don't have much experience with triplets, but I have plenty of experience taking care of my son. I'm a fast learner, and I can handle anything. There was a long pause on the other end before the woman spoke again. We've had a lot of challenges with the triplets, but I'll send you the details. If you want to come by for an interview, we're available. The woman's tone was polite but distant, and Sarah couldn't help but feel nervous. Still, she knew this was her shot, her chance to make a change. That afternoon, she found herself standing at the front door of the mansion, nervously clutching her resume and a bag that had seen better days. She wasn't used to being around such wealth, but she reminded herself that she deserved this. Her hands shook as she rang the doorbell, but when the door opened, she was greeted by a woman in her 40s, dressed in a suit that cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe. You must be Sarah, the woman said with a faint smile. Come in. We'll get started. Sarah followed the woman into the house, her eyes wide at the opulence of everything around her. The grand staircase, the crystal chandeliers, the marble floors, it was all so beautiful and perfect. But as they walked through the hallways, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The house was cold. The walls, though decorated with exquisite art, seemed empty. We've had a lot of trouble finding someone who can handle the triplets, the woman said as they walked into a sitting room. They're very active and challenging. We've tried many nannies, but no one has lasted. They've all quit within a day or two. It's just too much. Sarah nodded, trying to hide her nerves. I understand. But I've raised my son on my own, and I know how to handle tough situations. I think I can do this. The woman looked at Sarah with skepticism in her eyes. You might think you're prepared, but the triplets are a whole other level. We have high expectations. They need discipline, but they also need attention. They don't react well to strict routines. Sarah smiled, her mind racing. She knew she could do it. She had no doubt. "I'll do my best," she said. The interview went on for what felt like hours. Sarah explained her experience, talked about her ability to stay calm in tough situations, and mentioned how she was used to dealing with children who tested limits. Eventually, the woman stood up and extended her hand. "All right, Sarah. We'll give you a chance. You'll start tomorrow. It's a trial period, but if it works out, there could be a long-term position for you here." Sarah's heart leapt in her chest. This was it, the opportunity she had been waiting for. The next day, Sarah stood in front of the grand mansion once again, but this time, she felt a different kind of nervousness. Yesterday's interview had left her with a sense of excitement, but today, reality had settled in. She was about to face the triplets. She didn't know exactly what to expect, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. As she walked up the path to the door, Sarah tried to push away any doubts. She reminded herself that she could handle this. She'd done it before with her son, Jacob. She had been a single mother for years, and though it had been tough, she had always managed to find a way. This job, though challenging, felt like a way to give Jacob a better life, a life where they wouldn't have to struggle as much. When she rang the doorbell, the woman who had interviewed her, Mrs. Williams, greeted her with a quick smile and ushered her inside. The house was as grand as Sarah had remembered, but today, it felt less like a dream and more like a place she was determined to conquer. "We'll start with breakfast," Mrs. Williams said. "The triplets are usually hungry in the morning, but they're picky. So be prepared." Sarah nodded, her heart racing. She was ready for this. "Got it," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure what to expect. Mrs. Williams led her to the large kitchen, where the triplets were already sitting at a long, shiny table. The boys looked identical, tall for their age, with tousled brown hair and mischievous blue eyes. They were already making faces at each other, throwing cereal back and forth. There was no order, no peace. "This is Alex," Mrs. Williams pointed to the first boy, who had a bowl of cereal in his hands, flicking milk around the table. "And Ben," she pointed to the next one, who was drawing something on a napkin with a marker, "and Charlie," she finished, nodding toward the last boy, who was already playing with his spoon like it was a toy. Sarah smiled and walked over, trying to hide her nerves. She introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Sarah. I'll be here to help today." None of the boys said anything. They just stared at her for a moment before going back to whatever they were doing. Alex threw a spoonful of cereal at his brother, Ben, who laughed and ducked. Charlie stuck his spoon into his drink and splashed milk everywhere. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat, but she swallowed it down. This was just part of the job. She had to stay calm. She had to show them she was in charge, even if they didn't realize it yet. "Okay, let's get some order here," Sarah said, her voice firm but calm. "You need to eat your breakfast so we can start the day." To her surprise, the boys paused, though it only lasted for a few seconds. They eyed her for a moment, as if testing her, and then went back to their antics. But Sarah didn't give up. She calmly set the cereal bowls down in front of each of them, then grabbed some napkins and started wiping up the mess. She could feel their eyes on her, watching her every move. They were testing her, just like Mrs. Williams had said. But Sarah wasn't going to back down. She took a deep breath, gathered her thoughts, and said again, "Let's eat, please." This time, something in her tone must have made an impact. Ben was the first to pick up his spoon. Then Alex, though with a smirk, followed. Charlie didn't seem to care much, but he joined in too. Sarah couldn't believe it. She had actually managed to get them to focus, even if only for a few moments. The rest of breakfast went in a similar pattern. There were moments of chaos, but Sarah learned quickly how to redirect their attention. She made sure they ate, cleaned up, and even managed to get them to sit still for a few minutes. There were still distractions. The triplets had a knack for causing trouble when they were left to their own devices, but Sarah's calm nature began to have an effect. By the time breakfast was over, she felt both exhausted and proud. It was only the beginning of the day, but it already felt like a small victory. She turned to Mrs. Williams, who had been watching from the doorway. "You did well," Mrs. Williams said, her tone approving but not enthusiastic. "But don't get too comfortable. They'll test you again. This is just the start." Sarah nodded, though she felt a spark of confidence in her chest. She could do this. She was ready. After breakfast, she followed Mrs. Williams to the living room, where the triplets were already beginning their next round of chaos. They were jumping on the furniture, running around, and laughing like it was all one big game. But Sarah stood her ground. "All right, boys," she said firmly, "it's time to settle down. We have some fun activities planned today." They ignored her at first, but Sarah didn't let that discourage her. She calmly walked over to the play area, where a few toys were scattered around, and sat down on the floor. "I'll be here if you want to join," she said, picking up a toy car and rolling it across the floor. To her surprise, Ben was the first to come over. He sat down beside her and reached for another toy. Slowly, one by one, the triplets joined her. The house was still filled with noise and energy, but there was a sense of peace in the chaos now. Sarah realized that, perhaps, this was the way forward. The rest of the day wasn't perfect. There were still moments of mischief: Alex knocking over a vase, Charlie drawing on the walls, but for the first time since she had arrived, Sarah felt like she had made a real connection with the boys. She had found a way to get through to them, even if only for a moment. And in that moment, Sarah knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to give up. She was going to make this work, no matter what. Days passed, and Sarah was settling into her new routine. Every morning, the triplets seemed a little less wild. Their behavior hadn't changed overnight, but Sarah was beginning to see small signs of improvement. She knew she wasn't fully in control yet, but she could feel a shift. The boys were testing her, but now, she was testing them too. She had learned when to be firm and when to be patient. She was slowly finding the balance. One morning, the triplets were unusually quiet. Sarah had prepared breakfast as usual, and when she entered the dining room, she was met with an unexpected sight. The three boys were sitting at the table, quietly eating their cereal, without any chaos. For a moment, Sarah thought she was dreaming. She had never seen them so calm. The silence was almost eerie. She hesitated, unsure whether to believe it, but when Alex looked up at her and smiled, just a small, innocent smile, she realized it wasn't a dream. "Good morning," Sarah said, walking over to the table. She wanted to make sure she didn't ruin the moment. She smiled back at them, keeping her voice steady. "Good morning," Ben mumbled, his mouth full of cereal. Charlie didn't say anything but merely nodded, which was progress in itself. Sarah quickly grabbed a chair and sat down with them. She didn't want to disturb this fragile peace, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the strange feeling in her chest. She felt proud, almost like a mother who had finally gotten her children to listen. After breakfast, she had a plan. She had promised Mrs. Williams that she would make progress, and today felt like the day to try something new. She wanted to do something that would engage the triplets' minds and allow them to be creative. She grabbed a few art supplies from the closet: crayons, markers, and drawing paper. "Okay, boys," she said with a warm smile. "How about we do some drawing? I'll set up a big sheet of paper, and you can all make your own masterpiece." The triplets looked at each other with curiosity. Sarah could see them debating whether they should accept her offer or not. Then, Without warning, Ben stood up, grabbed a piece of paper, and plopped down on the floor. Alex followed suit, and Charlie, after a moment's hesitation, sat down as well. At first, Sarah wasn't sure what to expect. Would they throw the crayons around? Would they make a mess? But as the minutes passed, something amazing happened. The triplets were focused. They were coloring, drawing, and even showing each other what they had made. They were working together, in a way Sarah had never thought possible. For the first time, they seemed calm, and she could see their imaginations at work. As Sarah watched them, she couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. She had done this. She had managed to find something that captured their attention, something that took them away from their usual mischief. She didn't care that they had only been sitting still for a short while, it was a victory, and it was enough. But just as she began to relax, a loud crash echoed through the room. Charlie, who had been drawing with his markers, accidentally knocked over a cup of water, spilling it all over the floor. The peaceful moment shattered in an instant. Charlie looked horrified, and the other two boys immediately started laughing. Sarah took a deep breath. She had expected something like this, but it didn't make it easier to deal with. The triplets had been quiet, but they were still kids who made messes and pushed limits. "It's okay," Sarah said calmly, her voice steady. She grabbed some towels from the nearby cabinet and began cleaning up the water. "Accidents happen. Let's just clean it up together." The triplets, still giggling, seemed to take this in stride. They grabbed towels and helped, not out of any real desire to help but because they had seen Sarah handle the situation calmly. Sarah kept her composure, even though she could feel the frustration building inside. But she knew that if she lost control now, everything she had worked for would unravel. After the spill was cleaned up, the boys returned to their art, and Sarah watched them closely. She could tell that they were trying to behave, but their energy was still so unpredictable. It was like walking a tightrope. One small misstep, and everything could fall apart. Later that afternoon, Sarah decided to take the triplets outside for some fresh air. They needed to burn off some of their boundless energy, and a change of scenery might do them good. She led them to the backyard, where there was a large playset, a sandbox, and plenty of space for them to run around. The weather was beautiful, and the sun warmed the ground, making everything feel brighter. As the boys ran off to play, Sarah stood back, watching them carefully. She had learned not to hover too much but to keep an eye on them in case they needed her. She smiled as she saw Alex climb up the slide, then Ben follow him, both of them racing to get to the top first. Charlie was in the sandbox, digging a hole, completely engrossed in his task. For the first time, she could see a glimpse of the children they could be. They weren't perfect, but they weren't the chaotic, unmanageable kids everyone had warned her about. They were just kids who needed someone to understand them, someone who could see beyond their antics and find the real heart beneath the surface. As she watched the triplets, Sarah began to feel more confident. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a challenge, but it was one she was ready to face. She could do this. She could help these boys find a sense of peace and stability in their lives, just like she had done for her own son. It wouldn't be easy, but she was starting to believe that she could be the one to make it work. The triplets ran toward her, laughing and shouting, their energy bubbling over. Sarah smiled, ready for whatever came next. She wasn't just here to take care of them, she was here to make a difference in their lives. And with each passing day, she felt more sure of her place in this strange, beautiful world. The days flew by, and Sarah found herself settling into the rhythm of life with the triplets. While every day still had its challenges, she had learned to handle them with grace and patience. The triplets, once wild and unpredictable, were slowly beginning to show signs of improvement. They still tested her. There were tantrums, loud moments, and a few accidents, but it wasn't as overwhelming as it had been when she first arrived. Sarah had found a way to connect with them, and that made all the difference. One afternoon, Sarah had just finished helping the triplets with their homework when Mrs. Williams walked in, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. She looked at Sarah, then glanced over at the triplets, who were sitting quietly on the couch, finishing their snacks. "Sarah," Mrs. Williams said, her voice cool, but there was something different in her tone. "I wanted to talk to you." Sarah's heart raced. Was she being let go? Had the triplets caused trouble again? She stood up quickly, wiping her hands on her apron, and walked over to Mrs. Williams. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked, trying to read the expression on Mrs. Williams' face. Mrs. Williams smiled, though it was a guarded smile. "Everything's fine. I just wanted to say, you've done a remarkable job with the boys. I didn't think anyone could handle them, but you've proven me wrong." Sarah blinked, surprised. Mrs. Williams had always been distant, always keeping a professional distance. To hear her praise her was unexpected. "You've made a real difference here," Mrs. Williams continued, her eyes softening. "The triplets, they're better. They're more focused, more calm. I haven't seen them behave this well in a long time." Sarah felt a rush of pride. She had worked so hard, never sure if her efforts would ever be enough. But now, here it was, the validation she had been seeking. She had connected with the boys. She had made an impact. "They're not perfect," Sarah said with a small laugh. "But they're getting there. It's all about finding what works for them." Mrs. Williams nodded. "Exactly. And I think we've found someone who can handle them. I'm not sure I realized how important it was for the boys to have someone like you. They need stability. They need patience. They need love. I see now that you can provide that." The words sank in, and Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. She had proven herself. She had done more than just keep the boys out of trouble. She had become a real part of their lives. "Thank you," Sarah said softly, her voice thick with gratitude. "I never thought I'd be able to do this. It's been tough, but it's been worth it." Mrs. Williams smiled warmly, and for the first time, Sarah saw her not just as the employer, but as someone who genuinely appreciated her work. "I'll be honest, Sarah. I didn't think it would work out at first. I thought you might quit like all the others. But you've shown a level of dedication that I haven't seen before." "I'm not going anywhere," Sarah said with a determined smile. "I'm here for the long haul." Over the next few weeks, things only got better. The triplets continued to improve, slowly but surely. They were still full of energy, but it was easier to manage now. There were fewer tantrums, fewer moments of chaos. The boys were learning to listen, to follow instructions, and to respect the rules Sarah had set. They still had their moments, of course, but they were starting to understand the importance of balance and structure. One day, after school, the triplets were sitting around the kitchen table, doing their homework. Sarah was helping Charlie with his math, while Ben and Alex worked on their reading. It was a calm afternoon, the kind Sarah had always dreamed of. Suddenly, the front door opened, and Mr. Williams walked in. He was home early, something that was rare for him. He looked around the room, and for a moment, his gaze lingered on the boys. They were quiet, focused, and most importantly calm. It was a sight he wasn't used to. "Hello, everyone," Mr. Williams said, his voice full of surprise. "Looks like things are different around here." Sarah smiled, looking up from Charlie's homework. "Yes, it's been a good day. The boys are really starting to come around." Mr. Williams raised an eyebrow, then looked at his sons. "I'm impressed," he said, his voice softer than usual. "This is the best I've seen them behave in a long time." The triplets looked up at their father, their faces showing a mix of pride and uncertainty. They weren't used to praise from their parents. It had always been expectations, demands, and frustration. But today was different. Today, they had earned it. Sarah watched as Mr. Williams walked over to the table and ruffled each of their heads. "You're doing great, guys," he said, his voice full of warmth. It was a small moment, but it meant the world to the boys. As the evening went on, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. The triplets were no longer the wild, uncontrollable children they had been when she first arrived. They had grown, they had learned, and, most importantly, they had started to trust her. She had become more than just their nanny, she had become someone they relied on, someone who cared. Later that night, after the boys had gone to bed, Sarah sat in the quiet living room, reflecting on the past few weeks. She had come so far, and so had the triplets. She thought about her son, Jacob, and how she had always tried to do what was best for him. Now, she realized that her love and dedication were the same things that had made a difference in the triplets' lives. She had proved to herself that she could make a difference, no matter how tough the challenge. And in doing so, she had not only changed the lives of the triplets but had also found something she hadn't expected: a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. She wasn't just working a job. She was building something that mattered. And for Sarah, that was enough.